Look at this ship, 200,000 tons of steel, loaded with 20,000 metal containers, sitting on top of an ocean that has swallowed entire civilizations. Steel sinks. You learned that as a kid, threw a coin in a fountain gone. Dropped a key in a pool straight to the bottom. So why is this floating? Not just floating, it's moving. Through storms, through 50-meter waves, carrying more weight than most bridges are designed to hold. And somehow, it survives. The answer starts with a naked man running through ancient streets. It runs through one of Parliament's most explosive arguments in British history. And it ends with an engineering system so well designed the ship actually becomes more stable the heavier you load it. By the end of this video, you won't just know why ships float. You'll understand why sinking is actually the harder outcome to achieve. Steel sinks. That's not an opinion, it's basic physics. Drop any solid piece of steel in water, and it goes straight down. No hesitation. So when engineers first proposed building ships out of steel in the 1800s, the reaction wasn't debate, it was laughter. Experienced sailors, naval architects, portmasters, all of them said the same thing. You're describing a very expensive way to drown. At that point, every ship was built from wood. Wood floats naturally. Everyone understood that relationship. But steel ships? That was like proposing to build an aircraft out of concrete. The engineers pushing for steel weren't reckless, though. They'd understood something that changes the entire conversation about what floats and what doesn't. To understand it, we go back 2,000 years to a bathtub, and one of history's most embarrassing public moments, 250 BC. Syracuse, Greece. The king has a problem. He's commissioned a crown of pure gold, but he suspects his goldsmith cheated him, mixing cheaper silver into the metal, pocketing the difference. The crown looks right, weighs right, but the king wants to know for certain without melting it down. He hands the problem to Archimedes, smartest man in the city. Weeks pass. Nothing. Then Archimedes steps into his bath, watches water spill over the edge as his body sinks in, and something in his mind catches fire. The volume of water that spills out equals the volume of his body. If you know the volume of any object and its weight, you can calculate its density. And density is the fingerprint that separates gold from silver. He was so overwhelmed he sprinted out into the street. No clothes. Just running and screaming, "Eureka, I found it." His neighbors probably had thoughts about that. History doesn't record them. But what Archimedes found that day wasn't just a way to catch a dishonest goldsmith. He discovered the principle that would eventually allow us to build floating cities out of metal. Here's a simple experiment. Take a flat sheet of steel. Place it on water. It sinks before you let go. Now take that same sheet. Bend it into a bowl. It floats, same steel, same weight. One sinks, one floats. The only thing that changed was the shape. When you curve that steel into a bowl, you trap air inside, and air is roughly 800 times lighter than water. The bowl isn't competing with water using steel alone, it's bringing a pocket of air to the fight. The combined density of steel walls plus trapped air is lower than water. Lower density than water. You float. That's the whole rule. A cargo ship is that bowl, scaled up to the size of a small town. The steel hull forms the outer shell. Inside is mostly open space, air. Massive hollow chambers running the entire length of the vessel. When that hull sits in water, it displaces an enormous volume. The buoyancy force pushing upward, the force Archimedes discovered in his bathtub, equals the weight of all that displaced water. For a large cargo ship, that force is measured in hundreds of thousands of tons, enough to hold the ship up, comfortably, even loaded. Now here's the part that surprises people. Watch a cargo ship being loaded at port. As containers stack up, the hull sinks lower into the water. Watching from the dock, it looks like the ship is being pushed toward disaster. It's actually becoming more stable. As the ship sinks lower, it displaces more water. More displaced water means a larger buoyancy force pushing back up. The system corrects itself. Add weight, get more lift. The ship is physically incapable of sinking as long as that average density stays below water. The dangerous moment isn't when a ship is fully loaded. It's when someone loads it incorrectly. Which brings us to one of the most important painted marks in maritime history. Look at the side of any cargo ship and you'll find this symbol. A circle, bisected by a horizontal line. Several letters and additional lines branching out from it. Sailors call it the Plimsoll Line. Most people walk past it without a second glance. It got put there because of a political fight so ugly, a member of parliament had to be physically removed from the chamber. In the 1800s, there were no rules about how much cargo you could load onto a ship. None. Ship owners stuffed their vessels until the deck sat barely above the waterline. In rough weather, waves washed straight over the bow. Sailors called them coffin ships because boarding one meant genuinely calculating your odds of returning. Thousands of men died every year. Entire vessels disappeared. Families received nothing. Ship owners, many of whom had taken out insurance on overloaded vessels, collected their money and loaded the next one. Samuel Plimsoll wasn't a sailor or an engineer. He was a politician who'd grown up watching this happen and decided he'd had enough. He spent years pushing for legislation. Other MPs, several of whom owned shipping companies, blocked him at every turn, called him a nuisance, a radical, someone who didn't understand commerce. In 1875, during a parliamentary debate where his latest proposal was being killed again, Plimsoll stood up and called his colleagues villains, to their faces. In Parliament, he had to be removed from the chamber by other members. The public reaction was immediate. Editorials, protests, letters flooding government offices. The following year, the Merchant Shipping Act passed. Every vessel had to carry a marking on its hull showing the maximum safe waterline. If the water reached that mark, the ship was overloaded and couldn't sail. One angry politician. One embarrassing scene in Parliament. One line painted on a hull. Thousands of lives saved every decade since. Look closer at the mark and you notice it isn't just one line. There are several, each labeled differently. TF. FTSWWNA. Each one represents a different loading limit for different conditions. Seawater is denser than freshwater, it pushes harder against the hull. So a ship can carry more weight in salt water than in a river. Warm water is less dense than cold water. So winter conditions in the North Atlantic allow heavier loads than tropical routes. A ship that is perfectly within its limits crossing the North Sea in January might be dangerously overloaded on a warm freshwater river in summer. The same cargo, the same ship. Different physics, 6 lines. One for each major combination of temperature and salinity. All calculated before a single container gets loaded. Floating is one problem. Surviving is another. The hull plates on a modern cargo ship are typically 15 to 25 millimeters thick, roughly the width of your thumb. That's the skin standing between 200,000 tons of cargo and 4 kilometers of open ocean. But the hull isn't just a steel shell. Inside, running from bow to stern, there's a skeleton frames, ribs, beams, and a series of vertical steel walls called bulkheads. These walls divide the interior into dozens of completely sealed compartments. If the hull is breached, a collision, a submerged rock, structural failure water enters. But it can only fill the compartment where the damage occurred. The bulkheads stop it moving anywhere else. The ship loses some buoyancy in that section, but retains it everywhere else. A well-designed cargo vessel can flood multiple compartments and still float. The damage has to be catastrophic and spread across a large portion of the hull before sinking becomes likely. The Titanic had a compartment system. The problem was, The iceberg didn't punch a clean hole, it scraped along the hull and opened multiple compartments simultaneously, more than the designers had calculated for. Modern cargo ships account for that. The calculations now include worst-case damage scenarios, not just typical ones. The other major development is the double hull. Two complete layers of steel, separated by a gap roughly 2 meters wide. The outer layer faces the ocean. If it's damaged, water enters the gap, but stops there. The inner hull protecting the cargo holds stays intact. Before double hulls became mandatory, after the Exxon Valdez disaster in 1989, tankers had a single layer between their cargo and the sea. One puncture and the contents spilled directly into the ocean. Now the gap between the hulls serves double-duty protection against breaches and space for the ballast system, which is the part most people have never heard of, and the reason empty ships are actually more dangerous than full ones. Picture a cargo ship with nothing in it, hull empty, no containers, heading to port to pick up its next load. It should be safer, right? Less weight, less strain on the hull. It's not. An empty cargo ship is unstable in a way a loaded one rarely is. Without weight pushing it down, the hull rides too high. Only a fraction of it sits in the water. The center of gravity climbs upward. In rough weather, the ship rolls heavily, sometimes violently. Crews describe empty ships as uncomfortable at best, genuinely frightening at worst. The solution is ballast water. Ships intentionally flood internal tanks with seawater, sometimes thousands of tons of it, to push the hull back down to a safe operating depth. The ballast tanks run through the bottom of the ship, through the double hull space, and at both ends of the vessel. Pumps move water between them constantly, fine-tuning the ship's balance, the way a tightrope walker shifts their arms. If the ship starts to lean too much weight on one side, cargo shifted in a storm, the crew transfers ballast from one side to the other. The lean corrects itself within minutes. When cargo is loaded, the ballast is pumped out. When cargo is removed, it's pumped back in. The ship is never left to chance. The loading sequence itself is also calculated precisely before the first container touches the deck. Engineers run stability calculations for every voyage. Heavy containers go low, in the belly of the ship. Lighter ones stack toward the top. Weight distributes evenly across the length of the vessel, so the bow and stern sit at the same depth. Get it wrong and the consequences aren't minor. In 2013, the Merle Comfort, a large container ship, broke in half in the Indian Ocean. Both sections sank. The investigation pointed to structural stress caused by the interaction of wave forces and cargo distribution. The loading plan isn't bureaucracy. It's physics made into paperwork. The North Atlantic in January. Waves climbing to 15 meters. Wind that strips the paint off exposed surfaces. Swells arriving in sets, each one trying to push the ship sideways. A cargo ship doesn't avoid this, it sails through it. Here's something that sounds wrong the first time you hear it. The ship bends. In heavy seas, a fully loaded cargo ship flexes along its length, the bow and stern moving independently, the hull twisting slightly as different wave forces hit different sections simultaneously. The movement can be up to 30 centimeters across the length of the vessel. Naval engineers don't consider this a flaw. They designed it in. A completely rigid hull would crack under wave, stress the way a frozen pipe cracks suddenly, completely. Controlled flexibility lets the structure absorb energy rather than resist it until it breaks. Most large ships also have what's called a bulbous bow, a rounded protrusion below the waterline at the very front. It looks strange but reduces wave resistance significantly and helps the ship climb over swells rather than slamming into them face on. The weight distribution does the rest. When a large wave lifts the bow, the stern drops proportionally. The ship pivots over the wave rather than being pushed sideways by it. For centuries, sailors reported waves appearing without warning, massive isolated walls of water, rising out of otherwise moderate seas. Scientists largely dismissed these accounts as exaggeration. Then in 1995, instruments on an oil platform in the North Sea recorded a single wave 26 meters high, arriving in conditions where the average wave height was 12 meters. The Draupner wave. Documented, measured, undeniable. Rogue waves are real. They appear when swells from different directions combine at a single point, briefly stacking their energies. The result is a wave several times the height of everything around it, appearing with almost no warning. Modern cargo ship hulls are now stress-tested against rogue wave scenarios. The steel thickness, the internal frame spacing, the bulkhead placement, all of it accounts for a sudden massive impact anywhere on the hull. It's not that engineers expect a rogue wave on every voyage. It's that they build the ship as though one is possible on any voyage. Numbers can be slippery. Read them too fast and they blur together. So let's slow down and actually picture what the largest cargo ships in the world look like. 400 meters long. Lay the Empire State Building on its side. The ship is longer, wide enough that if you painted lane markings across the deck, you'd fit a 20-lane highway with room to spare. From keel to the top of the stacked containers, 73 meters. That's a 24-story building. Floating, these ships carry up to 24,000 containers. If you lined those containers up end to end, the row would stretch 145 kilometers. You could drive that distance at highway speed for over an hour and still be passing containers. The total cargo weight on a fully loaded vessel, around 200,000 tons. That's roughly 40 Suzoned adult African elephants, all floating, all moving at 25 kilometers per hour across water 4 kilometers deep. One engine powers the whole thing. A two-stroke diesel so large the engine room feels like standing inside a factory. 13 meters tall. Heavier than 2,000 family cars. Running on fuel oil so thick it has to be heated to 150 degrees before it can flow through the pipes. The crew managing all of this ship, cargo, engine, navigation, safety systems usually numbers around 20 to 25 people. 25 people. Moving more cargo in a single voyage than a fleet of 10,000 trucks could carry. So pull it all together. Cargo ships don't sink because no single thing protects them. It's a stack of overlapping systems, each one a fallback for the others. Archimedes' principle gives the hollow steel hull enough buoyancy to carry far more than its own weight. The Plimsoll system sets the outer limit of safe loading, calculated for different waters and seasons. Watertight compartments contain any breach before it spreads. The double hull adds a second barrier between ocean and cargo. The ballast system actively manages stability, compensating for empty holds, correcting lean, fine-tuning the ship's balance in real time. The flexible hull absorbs wave energy, rather than resisting it to destruction. And the loading plan ensures the weight never sits in a configuration that could make the ship unstable. Each system was developed in response to something that went wrong. Ships that sank, sailors that didn't come home, investigations that forced changes. What you're looking at when you watch a cargo ship move isn't just engineering. It's the accumulated lesson of every maritime disaster in the last 2 centuries, built into steel and painted onto hulls. The next time you see one of these vessels, and they move over 80% of everything you own, so you're benefiting from them constantly, I want you to notice something. It looks effortless. A city made of steel, gliding across water that has no reason to hold it up. It's effortless because of Archimedes in a bathtub, because of Samuel Plimsoll getting thrown out of Parliament, because of every engineer who looked at a disaster and asked what needs to change. None of that is visible. That's the point. If this made something ordinary look extraordinary, subscribe. Every week we take something you've walked past your entire life and show you what's actually happening inside it.